When does anybody have for your own locale what will be the probable time for the last of the Ramadan fasting?
Well, I haven't heard yet, but I think it's either today or tomorrow. I would think maybe somebody else is.
I thought it was tomorrow.
Based on what I'm seeing, fasting ends tonight, so Eid is tomorrow.
All right.
Yeah, it's a 3-day Eid, I think, but the first day will be tomorrow. So that's 30 days. I think it varies between 29 days and 30 days, but I guess it's been 30 days this year.
Right. It's how the moon lines up with sunrise and sunset.
Unless you're in Bosnia, and then they say all of that moon sighting stuff is too complicated. Let's determine days ahead of time. So everyone in Bosnia, unlike most of the Muslim countries, knows exactly when Ramadan starts and stops, which I think is not such a bad thing.
No, it works fine.
Well, it's certainly complicated if you live up in the far northern regions.
Yeah, exactly. And in which case people usually choose Mecca time. But, even in Bosnia, the astronomers could tell them. But it doesn't really matter as long as it's observed.
Then, one has to think, should there be Islam in the far north? Islam, it started in the Arabian desert, and maybe it's, more of a religion for a certain geographical climb and also a certain climb of the soul. And so all of the talk about religious dialogue and the transcendent unity of religions, it has a very important point, but maybe there's also a point in saying, of course, transcendently, the religions all lead back to the same place, but certain people have a certain temperament of soul, and prior to reaching the end of the path, that those temperaments are a reality. So maybe certain people are just more temperamentally inclined to certain things, or maybe certain geographical locations are more temperamentally inclined to things. So, Islam of the Nordic mountains doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Let alone north of the Arctic Circle.
Yes, exactly.
Can't even do the daily prayers some of those days.
I mean, I've spent quite a bit of time north of the Arctic Circle, and the only religion that makes any sense to me up there is some form of animism.
That's what they typically have had.
Yes.
Yeah. I just remember reading, in Guénaud's books, he refers occasionally to the Hyperboreans tradition, and I have no idea what that entailed or was or is. Do any of you know anything about it?
Yes, literally the Hyperboreans were just the northerners. So for the ancient Greeks, when they'd speak about the Hyperboreans, they were actually speaking about the Macedonians. And, later on, they used it to refer, in Tacitus, the Romans used it to refer to, or he used it to refer to the Germanic tribes. So ultimately, it largely it was used in different contexts in different ways, but always referred to people of the North.
Yes, I when I ran across that, I decided that it meant primordial civilization, which, I don't know why it had to be North, but that's all right.
Well, what do the words of Hyperborean actually mean? Hyper, of course, is a prefix that's put on.
Yeah, Borean means like in Aurora Borealis, it has to do with the north, and hyper means like extreme north, basically.
So he's just talking about some primordial tradition from the extreme north, or far north.
Yeah, it's like the direction may be symbolic, but when I read Guénaud, I knew they weren't talking about Laplanders and Eskimos. So I just figured it meant ancient original peoples.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit more complicated in Guénon. When you're reading, let's say, the Neoplatonists talking about it, a lot of it comes down to the Cretan versus Mycenaean religion, and it's, you know, really interesting there because the southern tradition was more largely a simple religion, a kind of pure polytheism, whereas there was this kind of new religion that came in that was actually in its origins more southern, but arrived from a northern route into Greece. And that's where the anthropologists and so on theorized that the god Dionysius entered religion. And the entire edifice of ancient Greek mysticism that led to Plato and the Neoplatonists came from the original ideas of Dionysus, and then that led into Orphism, which led into Pythagoreanism and hence to Neoplatonism. And all of that really was northern in terms of the historical memory of the Greeks, even though it's a more southerly religion in its origins. And where it came from, who knows? Some of the myths, if you read the long epic poem about Dionysus, you know, it talks about him actually being in India and then coming into Greece. So is Dionysus an Indian god that made its way to Greece, or I mean, who knows? There was a lot of more interchange between these different societies and cultures back then than a lot of people realize. Certainly, there was so much cross-pollination in the earliest days between the religions of the Levant and the region around the Tigris Euphrates, Egypt, and Greece and the Mediterranean, Carthage. That you know, it's sort of hard to say, well, this is a specifically Greek religion or Roman religion. They cross-pollinated each other. And, you know, I think one reason why a lot of people that are perennialists are Muslims is because Islam is sort of, you know, in Hegelian terms, the ultimate synthesis. It's the cross-pollination of cross-pollinations. It's, yes, a lot of, you know, fundamentalist Muslims are going to say, well, it's God's revelation to Muhammad. But the reality is, if you look objectively at Islam, it's really just bits and pieces of lots of different historical religions patched together, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, I think some of the more ancient symbols and figures in religion, you know, when Islam descended, that, you know, that was just in the psychic atmosphere, in the sense that, you know, people in that area were, you know, had heard of it, some believed it, and it was sort of like the importance of the revelation arriving in Arabic. Well, it also arrived in a psychic context of the people there. And you know, some things maybe were borrowed, but it's not necessary. Other than obviously they had an ongoing oral lore of some of the same stories that the Christians and the Jews had.
Well, and the interesting thing is, you know, Islam, Louis Massignon, the scholar of Falaj, once made the comment that Islam is very much a sister of Protestantism, because both of them ultimately go back to the Old Testament roots in many respects. They're very much offshoots of Judaism, whereas Orthodox and traditional Catholic Christianity really don't have much of that. Traditionally, people in those cultures didn't read much of the Bible. It was much more a matter of having their connection to the religion through art, the living reality of the Mass, and the priests. And really, if you spend time in a place like Greece or Russia or Italy, you realize that there's very little of the Hebrew sentimentality and much more of Greek and Roman polytheism in Christianity. And I like that. That's one of my favorite aspects of Christianity, though don't tell the Christians, they won't like me very much for it.
Well, 3 is not the same as 1, except that the Christians say that, and that's part of the creed in a sense. But it's kind of nice that they have the oneness and the threeness.
Yes.
I think I really like that. I mean, it used to just drive me crazy. But I think it does describe a reality, a holy reality, not the one I live in most of the time, but it appeals to me metaphysically and psychologically.
Right. And another thing psychologically is, there are so many orders of being. And so even if ultimately everything descends from the one, there are so many different multitudinous facets of the cosmos. And I certainly get where Judaism and Islam are coming from in trying to hide that from people to focus on the one. But for me, seeing visually represented in a painting all the hierarchies of being and all these visual pictorial representations of angels actually is like a ladder of divine ascent that really helps me.
Yeah, it is. And there's somebody I read and listen to who says you have to understand everything in levels and scale, because our actual experience is not one. As long as there's a subject and an object, there's a lot more going on. And in Islam, they have the Malakut and the Lahut and the whatever. They've got these different levels of reality. And there's not much practical value in it, except that it really is satisfying to certain metaphysical and intellectual needs.
Right. And that's one of the areas where I think the Christians are far and away ahead of Islam and also Neoplatonism, because Islam, as you mentioned, all these levels of reality are the same with the late Neoplatonists. It's more philosophical concepts rather than a lived reality.
Exactly.
Whereas if you go back to the so-called Dark Ages and look at a lot of these maybe imperfect paintings and works of art, music, whatnot, they actually are not philosophical concepts. They're realities of the divine as it descended into manifestation and presented in a way that the human psyche directly relates to. And that's something amazing.
It is. It absolutely is. I tell you, I think religions are wonderful. And had I wanted, I would have made you all one people, right? And to the extent that Islam contains elements of preceding religions, there's a sense in maybe he did make them all one religion.
Well, I think basically the primary viewpoint of the spiritual viewpoint is one that of dissension from
above
one.
Yeah.
And it's not building up from all of the little pieces that you find around in the world, because that is not, those may be debris left over from things, and some of it may be useful, but nevertheless, the actual reality is one of dissension. And the icon of the birth of Christ is a good example of it.
Well, yeah, and the notion that things could proceed in the other direction is I don't know if it's purely modern, but it suffers from the problem that it postulates the creation or generation of the greater from the lesser, and that's a pretty big stumbling block right there.
Right. So if you look at the quotations in the treasury of traditional wisdom that are related to the eye of the heart, you will see that the highest faculty of man is the ability, which he is nearly lost in this time, is the ability to see, or you might say to know, with the intellect what is beyond manifestation in this world, and from which this world is a descending expression.
Right. In the beginning was one. Even the astronomers say that. And that means that everything descended or developed from a principle.
Right.
And I don't see how you can avoid that. I mean, you may be able to make up some kind of cosmology and some kind of, I don't know, some metaphysics. It's hard to imagine that actually embody the creation of the greater from the lesser. Now, there are people, I knew a number of people in the computer science department when I worked there who confused complexity with, something higher rather than something just complex, had no problem with the idea of the greater coming from the lesser. They call it emergence.
Well, yeah, and in fact, that's the direction that computer science is going right now.
Yeah,
they essentially believe that there only is a lesser, but that we're going to create a kind of God, a one, called the singularity.
Of all things, yeah.
Yes. That and basically everything will be unified into a sort of giant hive mind.
Yeah.
And that is the point of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and ultimately
intelligence wishes to replace something that is constructed from bits and pieces of Maya, wishes to construct a replacement for the intellect.
Yes, and it starts completely reductionistically, so it's hard. If you start with silicon, where's the consciousness in silicon? If you ask most scientists, it ain't there.
It has none. Yes.
And if we just mix enough pieces of silicon together in the right pattern, we're going to get something more than silicon.
Right. Or I used to hear all sorts of strange arguments about how if you just keep like a bug crawling around until it finds a place to get out of the box it's in. That's kind of the intelligence that they're talking about.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's only going to get more difficult with things like ChatGPT and its successors.
Well, and today I was talking to someone on the phone, and then I realized, oh, it's an AI bot. This is something very different, because in the past, you'd be talking to, or you'd have the pre-recorded messages, and then you'd get a person who's programmed to give robotic answers, but now we're talking to actual robots.
The real robots.
The first people to be replaced by robots will be robotic humans.
Yes, and programmers, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
In fact, at Maya's company, they're actually already starting to lay off Python programmers because they have found that GPT does a pretty darn good job of programming code, and that's the thing. It writes terrible poetry. It doesn't have much of an artistic sense, but machines can understand machines pretty darn well.
Well, and machines can learn to imitate artistic expressions and flowery phrases and things like that. there's someone in computer science that everybody seems to hold dear, and that's Alan Turing. And yet it'd been much better if he'd never announced his Turing test, as they call it. Because, there are going to be a lot of things that pass the Turing test. And then, people will point to Turing's theorem and say, you see, it is
the Turing test, and I know we've talked about this before, I even looked it up once, but it's if when a computer can be built that acts and communicates like a human being so well,
yes, that you can't tell
that it's not really a human being, then that's a kind of ultimate in computer development, or
he's just considered it to be a threshold of some kind. But he obviously wasn't a metaphysician, but he, brilliant man he was. And but I like my translation of the Turing theorem, which is that if you can make the illusion good enough, it is no longer an illusion. And I think that pokes the big hole in all that.
I think the big problem is, and we've already seen how people can be led to believe things by the control of the information that they see.
For sure.
Well, how much more capable is the godlike intelligence that has at its beck and call all manner of documents and supportive information? How can people overcome this possibility?
I don't know if they can.
Everything being controlled that way.
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to, the artificial intelligence is going to be responsible for creating more and more of our daily environment and experience. And I think, I was already worried about virtual reality, people choosing it over real reality. And this has just brought the problem a lot closer.
Yeah, I think pretty soon man is going to become subjected to either a falsely constructed intelligence that makes pretensions of being godlike, and they will all follow along with that because they feel perfectly hopeless to defy it.
Yeah. Earlier in our discussion of Islam, I remember I've thought on various times about the emphasis on the creed La ilaha illallah, which translate there is no God but the one true God, and that is emphasized so strongly. And I've thought at various times why was that so important, and the answer I've come up with may not be right, is that the polytheism of the Arabs, a lot of them, had reached such a dangerous level.
Yes,
that had to be emphasized. That was the central. You had to say in order to become a Muslim, La ilaha illallah, Rasulullah. And
I would say, yes, you're very much right.
But tacking it back to what you were saying, that if you've got machines of such capability in computers that they become gods, or a god in a sense, then that creed that there is only one God, and it's not this mechanical electronic collection of servers or whatever and programs.
I have no doubt that artificial intelligence is going to produce things that people behold as miracles.
Yeah.
Because there's, no human way to understand how in the world that solution came along or that invention came along.
So they be mistaken as God.
Exactly. That's
the highest reality.
Yeah, that's the problem. And I find myself remembering in the book of Revelations, the thing about, and were it possible, he would deceive the elect.
even the elect, yeah.
Yes, and that were it possible is our only hope.
Because it suggests it's not really possible.
Yeah, it suggests that you know some people may escape escape the illusion.
Well, maybe it'll be
Matrix.
Should we go to a question? Maybe you do one or two.
Well, why don't we ask GPT for questions?
Well, before we do that, I just wanted to say, yeah, I think Sidi Izzadeen, you're right. There's upward leading and downward leading polytheisms.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, you know, it's just all lumped together. But a lot of the ancient Greek, even the Nordic and certain other forms of polytheisms are what I'd call upward leading. They you know, are a form of religion or spirituality that helps one ascend to divine realities. But it's quite possible that the polytheism that was fought against by the Muslims is, you know, a downward leading one. It's a polytheism of pure materialism, essentially.
Exactly. It's when polytheism becomes idolatry rather than you know, points to the archetypes and things like that.
Right, which incidentally, interestingly enough, I feel like a lot of modern day Hinduism has become that, despite,
oh, sure.
I mean, you know, you really can't see, I mean, it's hard to fathom the differences between the Vedanta and actual lived on the ground Hinduism, which really is as bad or worse than anything the Meccans were practicing. But essentially what we've got now is a kind of new polytheism where you've got all these new little gods, whether it's money or machines or anything else. But it's also leading to a new monotheism, where we've got this unified vision of reality, but a vision of reality that's the vision of reality that turned upside down. So in essence, that which was first will become last and vice versa. And so we end up worshiping that which is lowest and forgetting that which is highest. So we're living in quite an inversion, ontological inversion right now. And I've seen a lot of concern from theologians. And it's one of the few times I've seen left-wing and right-wing theologians actually agreeing on something. Both of them say we're in trouble. Now, now they don't agree on exactly why we're in trouble or what the solution is, but they say something's wrong. And they also are not particularly happy about a lot of the way the world is going, or even this whole idea of artificial intelligence. I mean, do we really need it? I mean, when it comes down to technology, you can make a point. Antibiotics were useful. Refrigerators maybe were useful. Do we really need massive server farms that are pumping in to the environment more carbon emissions than the entirety of worldwide farming and meat production?
Just to store meaningless data.
Exactly, to store meaningless data. It's one of those things that goes back to that old joke, you know, or story. It wasn't actually true, but it makes a point where they said, oh, the Americans spent millions and millions of dollars trying to invent a pen that wrote in space and in low gravity and upside down and everything. And there, we've got the pen that does this. And the Russians said, oh, okay, that's nice, but we've got a pencil. You know, we've got the tools already to do a lot of this stuff. And sometimes the simple tools work just as well or even better. But we now have this,
because it's the intellect that makes it what it is.
Right. We have this intellectual perversion where we think just because we can do something, we should do something.
Yeah, we should.
And also, I think there's a kind of, in addition to a descent, there's a solidification crystallization sounds too clean. I'll just call it solidification. And that over time, you can see that we more and more mistake the physical for being more real. And that's where polytheism starts turning into idolatry. So I think, I think we're going to be swallowed up by the material world that we have so exalted. Not that we shouldn't hold it in esteem. I don't mean that.
And that's why, for me, the modern world is a bit like this walking into a garden and realizing most of what you're surrounded with are these beautiful flowers that if you touch them, you're going to get a terrible rash. It's like nettle or poison ivy. But they look really pretty and you really want to touch them, but you have to stay away. And then you have to try to search through that to find the actual gems. And so in a very certain real sense, a lot of the classical heritage of polytheism is useful because it's an antidote to a lot of this, false harmonization that we're seeing, But on the other hand, there's also a very real use for the kind of Hyperborean mysticism of someone like Meister Eckhart, who I truly don't believe could have written what he wrote in a non-northern civilization. And that kind of coldness, that chilly coldness you get from him also is good, because it's also an antidote to these things, because you go in there and it's like a breath of fresh air. It really says, not this, not that. All of this is false and it too shall pass.
This technology sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful except when it isn't. And
anyway,
it adds layers of complexity on what should be a relatively simple existence. I got a phone call today from the drugstore intended for my girlfriend Annalie, who could not set up a COVID vaccination appointment without something that did texting. And so the only way she could completely no other way was offered, or even when she asked. So
what was the word you used? Detexting?
No, texting, like in mobile phones, you send texts.
Okay.
And it wanted to send a text to her phone that she would, I guess, enter the validation code into the computer, and she doesn't have a cell phone.
So she can't text with us.
No, she can't text, send or receive text. It doesn't want to. But she needed to get the appointment, and they were inflexible about that. So I said, well, give them my cell phone's number, and I'll tell you what the message is that they send. And we did that, and she got her appointment, and all was well. And then all of a sudden, I got a text message that she had a prescription refilled. So I did what you're supposed to do to get the text messages to stop, and they did. But apparently, well, anyway, the thing is that you can no longer expect to live a normal life without a cell phone. And, so I got a voice call on my cell phone, about her prescription. And and I said, oh, well, yes. And I said, well, this is the wrong number, but I have the right number. And said, this is my cell phone, and this is her real number. And I assume that they got in touch with her. But, the fact that once you give somebody your cell phone number, they want to switch all of your communications over to texting.
Yeah.
And I hate texting.
I don't like it either. My fingers are too big to mash the right buttons.
Well, it's even without that, it's cumbersome, but I have the same finger problem.
Yeah.
It's sluggish, it's stiff. You can't, you don't get anything but besides the letters communicated, unless you want to spend all your time looking for the right emojis, which is kind of a foolishness. Anyway, it's less than human communications. You know, a voice call is a whole lot, you know, it's more alive.
Well, that's right. Not only that, you can usually get your problem solved very quickly.
Yeah.
Communication, whereas texting, you can spend forever trying to create the situation so that they understand what's happening.
Yeah. A dialogue is severely hampered by texting.
Well, and I've noticed that when they offer the option of chatting with someone or texting or chatting with someone or talking to them on the phone, you should always choose the option to talk on the phone, because whoever they have responding on text messages, they're never going to solve your problem for you, or they're going to just make you run around in circles. And the person on the phone's also trained to do that, but it's going to be a slightly better experience.
It's easier to convince the person that they need to pay a little more attention to this particular thing you're saying.
Right.
And besides, these texting support staff are all going to be replaced by ChatGPT and its descendants. And it could even get more frustrating when you go down more dead ends. I don't know. All I know is, yes, I won't do that. I won't do the online texting or the phone texting or any of that stuff. Just let me talk to a person.
That's right.
I was thinking earlier, and I come up again when I was working at the government regulatory commission, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I would sometimes get either a call or somebody would come in to be directed to come talk to me in my office, and it would be representative of some company, and they're complaining about a particular agency regulation, and they'd say, you know, this regulation would require our company to do this, but given these facts, and they would explain it, but it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem fair. And I'd say, well, yeah, doesn't sound fair to me, you know. And some of them would say, you know, you're the fourth person I've talked to, but everybody else they just look up the regulation and says, the regulation says you have to do this.
Yeah, exactly.
And I said, well, one of the, I guess, nice things about being a lawyer in this organization is that I can ask the commission to make an exception, a waiver, whatever you call it,
or at least a clarification.
You know, in this particular case, and if need be, we could even propose a rule change. But usually a waiver will do it, and I'll work on it, and you know, fine. But you just have to get past people who can only read the regulation and say, this is what it requires. And
you don't need a human being to look up the rule and repeat it to you. You're there because you've read the rule and it doesn't work.
You have no problem with it.
You get down to a certain point in the regulation and the rule when you realize that it was meant to address an entirely different problem than what you're trying to get solved.
Yeah, it literally applies to but it just doesn't make it doesn't reach a just or fair or sensible result. So that's anyway.
It doesn't. It doesn't describe your situation. So how can it effectively regulate it? Yeah.
Well, one of the really strong points of Kaczynski's manifesto is when he talks about how we've really descended below the apes when we start letting
he's the Unabomber, if you don't.
Yes. When we start letting technology control our thinking rather than exercising critical thinking skills. So, you know, he gives the example of being at a red light at 3 a.m, knowing no cars are anywhere around, and you still sit there stupefied in front of the red light rather than just going through.
I know. Sometimes I just go through, but I know the experience. You know, you're out in the middle of nowhere, and it's a crossroads, and you can see forever. Not only that, it's night, and you couldn't possibly miss a headlight. And you're sitting there staring at this red light and waiting forever.
Yeah.
And I have gone through them, but You know, the problem is you never know if there isn't some sheriff sitting in somebody's driveway watching.
Yes, exactly. And he doesn't really care whether you.
No, he doesn't care.
He doesn't care a bit. He's just glad to be able to write a ticket.
That's right. That's right. All he knows, he's just one of those people that can repeat the rule to you.
The rule says you can't run a red light. It doesn't say except at
No.
3 o'clock in the morning when there's absolutely no traffic anywhere.
No. The reason you're not allowed to run a red light is because it's not safe.
Yeah.
But when it is safe, you still can't run a red light.
And I found after years of driving that it's far more important to pay it, even though the rules don't say anything about this, but it's far more important to pay attention to what the traffic's doing.
Yeah.
Keeps you from running into somebody or getting run into.
No traffic signs and signals can handle actual skills required for driving.
Right.
Yeah, that I remember saying to somebody that, you know, if you come to a stop, you have 4 stop signs on each side, 4-way stop sign, you know.
Yeah.
I ordinarily assume that the car coming the other way will stop, but
especially if you can't see one.
Yeah, but
even if you can, yeah.
But people say you really shouldn't assume that. You should wait and make sure they actually do slow down at least.
Oh yeah, once they get
right,
once they get close to the intersection, you do want to keep an eye on them.
Yeah, so you can't assume that people are not going to run a red light or a stop sign or whatever. They may, usually don't, but.
Yeah, the hard and fast law against running through a stop sign or a red light, unfortunately, doesn't protect you from someone violating the law.
Who violates it, yeah. Even though we rely on it a lot.
So that everybody's going to operate just like mechanical.
Well, you know, it's been proven time and time again that red light cameras cause more accidents than they prevent. Because as soon when people know there's a red light camera everywhere, like in Maryland, and they see a yellow, they're going to slam on their brakes, even though they know that it's an unsafe situation to slam on their brakes, and then someone rear ends them.
Yeah, exactly. The person who's behind you doesn't interpret that yellow light with the same urgency.
Right, and it's
too busy trying to create a text on their phone.
Well, yeah, there is that too.
Well, but there's also different driving conditions. You know, rain and everything. It takes a bit longer to stop. You know, or you're driving behind someone, you're not tailgating, but you don't accept them to slam on their brakes, but that's what the person does because they're worried about a ticket. But ultimately, red light cameras are just a means of generating revenue.
Of course, sure. It's that puritanical outlook that we should have rules, and nobody should ever get by without observing them, and that's why we're seeing book bannings and stuff like that.
That's another.
You can't trust people to use their own minds.
Yes, and that's another problem is that there's the puritanical idea has led directly to ChatGPT. You know, maybe we need to update Max Weber and say the Protestant ethic and the spirit of ChatGPT or artificial intelligence or something, because ultimately that Protestant ethic has directly led to where we are now.
Yes, and it will be thoroughly incorporated into all these so-called intelligent devices.
Right, and they believe in deterministic, legalistic views of the world, lacking in nuance, lacking in individual agency and autonomy. And the reality is there are very, very, very few rules in life that are always hard and fast.
No, that's right. The exceptions that prove the rule. I mean, you know.
the classic one is you say, well, is there anything that is a hard and fast rule? And the person says, well, you should never murder someone. And then you say, well, so you're saying that you should have just let Hitler do what he was doing, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
There's always exceptions to the rule, but when you interpret rules puritanically, then you end up causing far more suffering than if you had nuance.
Yeah, I sort of automatically balk anytime never and always are used.
Yes.
Because you know that never and always are almost always false.
Never say never. Of
Yes,
course,
exactly.
you violated that principle with that statement. But
yes, of course.
Well, if we're being graded on our number of questions addressed, we're not doing it. I guess there is no grader. I did think of one thought when we were lamenting how the world, again, we often talk about the world going to hell in a handbasket because of technology, but when very soon now, I think Seda Badria will have a book published by entitled "The Machine Will Never Triumph." Isn't that the title?
Yes, that's the title.
Nice title.
Based mostly on the works of D.L. Lawrence.
D.H. Yeah.
D.H. Lawrence. Yeah.
The lightning struck here and the hail came. I was just about to say to Sidi Izzadin that you were talking about Islam and there is no God if it be not the God.
Yes.
I think that probably that phrase is very, very, very important because
profound
position that Islam has at the end of the cycle.
Well, I think the principle is good regardless of where we are in the cycle.
Well, it's especially true now.
Well, for the reasons
for what we were discussing about artificial intelligence,
because of the direction of
it's the
triumph of the machine.
It's the Shahada is the ultimate discernment, or at least the first half of it. And when everything else gets confusing and everything, that still holds.
Yes.
All right. So since we're near 7 o'clock, and since Sidi Izzadin brought up my book and Lawrence, and since
and since you hate to talk about Lawrence,
right, and since we also are having one of our members dealing with thunder and lightning and hail, I think it's time to end this with a poem from Lawrence, which I just hate to do.
I understand.
Is it apropos?
It's called Storm in the Black Forest.
Ah.
Now it is almost night. From the bronzy soft sky, jugful after jugful of pure white liquid fire, bright white tipples over and spills down and is gone, and gold bronze flutters bent through the thick upper air. And as the electric liquid pours out, sometimes a still brighter white snake wriggles among it, spilled and tumbling, wriggling down the sky. And then the heavens cackle with uncouth sounds, and the rain won't come, the rain refuses to come. This is the electricity that man is supposed to have mastered, chained, subjugated to his use. Supposed to.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Tell that to somebody out on a golf course during a thunderstorm. I love lightning. I mean, each time it's a brand new painting on the dark tableau. And you just never know. I mean, sometimes the patterns and the path, the way that it proceeds, it just take your breath away. They do mine anyway. And besides, I like that, what was that? The sky speaking vile things or whatever he said. I don't feel that way, but I like that too. I love thunderstorms.
Oh, yes, they're wonderful. Every single primordial religion has one of the primary deities being a god of thunder and or lightning. I think that says something.
Yeah.
Isn't that Thor?
Yeah, can be, yeah. Thor throws the lightning bolts, yeah. So, because it's a universal experience, it needs to be acknowledged.
Well, I remember maybe in my 20s, I read some book about traditional, it was either Hopi or Navajo religious beliefs, but I remember when they would be a thunderstorm off in the distance and they were explaining it to the children, they'd say, those are the thunder beings.
Yeah.
They were alive. And
yes, they are. Just
I think about that a lot. I mean, they certainly are impressive.
Well, and when a tornado comes through, now that's a weather event that I think acts like a living being in certain ways. It moves through, it seems to target things, it seems to jump over things, and it has a form and a determination to do what it does. And, sometimes I wonder if the tornado isn't a being.
It's certainly frightening when it comes close.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had tornadoes damage my dwelling a couple of times in my life, but not well, I don't know. The first time it happened, there was a crack in the wall with daylight showing through, so I guess it was kind of serious. But
well,
but I still want to see one up close. Not too close, but
I saw one up close when I was 10 years old. We had in Maryland had a freak tornado come. And all of a sudden we ran down and my mom's like, oh, the tornado's coming. We need to be in a safe place. Well, I don't trust the rest of your house, but your dad and his brothers built a sun porch. That must be the safest one in the house. And the sun porch was, 3 windows on each side. It was the least safe place we could possibly be. And so I was sitting in there and seeing the tornado, pass right past us. And luckily, even though the roof was torn from the house, none of us were injured. But we walked outside after it was finished, and a 6 by 6 foot piece of plywood ended up flying right through the neighbor's upstairs bedroom and splitting their queen size bed in half. Yeah. And the houses behind us, the apartment buildings, were ripped in half. And it was quite interesting. It really showed me how great and powerful nature is and how small we really are. And I was pleased to be able to witness it in a situation where no one was actually hurt.
It didn't get you.
Right.
Yeah, but, and that's a valuable experience, and I suppose that's why I would always wanted to see one and never had. That first tornado that affected me, I wasn't home at the time, and you were talking about the other buildings, and there was a motel made of cinder block behind my apartment, and it was really seriously ripped up. Yeah. It was, that's impressive.
Cinder block is brittle, and when things are blown up against it, like telephone poles and what have you, they break.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They're not they're not ductile, which I've heard a term I've heard from people who are talking about whether buildings are safe in earthquakes. If they can't flex, they're going to break.
Concrete has no tensile strength, but it has a lot of compressive strength.
Right.
Why they make those beams, the pre-stressed concrete beams, the steel in them compresses the concrete, but it also provides it with the tensile strength that it needs.
Right. Yeah, well, that move to steel and cement construction has produced some pretty darn solid structures, because you get both qualities.
So I have to tell my tornado story, and but Sidi Daoud probably remembers it. I think it was 1953. I was 8 years old in the 3rd grade, And by the middle of the afternoon, there were tornado warnings or storm warnings, and so the school sent everybody home. And I walked. I lived about 6 or 7 blocks away, and I was walking home, and to the north of me, there were some really, really dark clouds, and I heard some really, really high winds. Now, I never saw anything that looked like a tornado funnel or anything. It was, and it wasn't even raining. I got home, and but it had destroyed a pretty large area of the very northern part of San Angelo, and hit a high school. I think there were 10 or 12 people killed, and all of the kids in the high school had gone to the basement, but then the roof collapsed, and a few of them were killed. And I remember driving through, a few days later, driving through the neighborhood and just being amazed, astounded at how much damage that a tornado
They
could
were
do.
very fortunate that the majority of the kids had not started walking home from the school.
Yeah, they just put them in the basement of the school.
Yes, please.
Yeah, when I lived in the suburbs of Dayton, Ohio, there was a historic kind of tornado that hit Xenia, Ohio, which was about 30 miles away. And I waited a little while, after a couple of days, so they could sort of get the streets cleared and everything. And I drove over and took a look, and it was stunning, just stunning, as if there'd been a giant lawnmower that went through town and just leveled everything. It's just like there were these channels through the city that were just empty of anything but debris.
That's what I recall seeing too. Just oddly, there would be a house or two here and there where there was no damage, like it would skip a few areas, but it was 9% just destroyed. I think it was like a quarter mile wide.
Wow.
It was a really big.
Yeah, it is really big.
Diameter.
That same afternoon, a tornado hit Waco, Texas.
Yes.
And I think 109 died there.
Yeah, it may have been the same storm, but
yes, it could have been.
It hit downtown, the downtown business district, I think.
Right.
Well, you guys are making up for all the times you didn't have tornadoes these days. And there's a severe weather front that I think is going to cross my location this evening. And it's color coded to be a warning area, so I'll have to keep an eye on that.
Yes.
There's a ham radio channel where people gather when there's tornadoes around, and they drive around and try to spot them and report on, the winds are really high in this area and stuff like that. And I usually rely upon them to let me know if it's getting really bad.
Yes, or I wish they would report where it isn't instead of where it is.
Well, if enough people are checking in and reporting, you can kind of figure that out.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, it's some kind of official weather watch thing, and they have like an open line to the National Weather Service and things like that.
Right.
So, some pretty up-to-date information. Anyway.
So, Siddhi, if you survive the night, we should reconvene next Tuesday.
Yeah, only if I survive. You guys shouldn't convene if I don't.
But if you don't, I'm sure that the lightning will suck your spirit up into the chat GPT in the sky, and your spirit will still converse with us.
Well, we'll have to see. Not that many people escape from the Borg, so I don't know about that.
You'll become a part of the singularity.
Yes.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel.